that's all everybody's been talking about today here in Moscow, at least, is this insane video published by Sarah Ashton-Cirillo, the new spokesperson of the Ukrainian military.
English
Just an
spokesperson.
absolutely right, just absolutely unhinged diatribe. It's hard to believe it was real. A lot of people, a lot of the anti-Russian voices, I was going to call them pro-Ukrainian voices, but they're not. There's nothing pro-Ukrainian about sentencing hundreds of thousands of boys to die for a proxy war for BlackRock's profits. These anti-Russian NATO trolls and all these people on social media were spending the better part of the day insisting that this video was fake, that it was somehow a Russian deep fake. And that actually spawned a further video from Sarah Ashton-Cirillo in which this person insisted, no, this is real. This is absolutely real. Attempted to clarify that they weren't necessarily talking about hunting down Russians in the streets. But let's take a look at this video. It's because it's just, it's almost beyond belief how rabid it is.
Yeah, I mean, I had named this stream Goodbye Horses, but I can't play the song from one of the most famous scenes of Silence of the Lambs because I can't layer it over this diatribe by this Ukrainian military official spokesperson, Sarah Ashton-Cirillo, because it would violate YouTube terms of using licensed music and we would be demonetized. So just sing it in your head. If you've seen Silence of the Lambs, just kind of hum along as you watch this.
Russia hates the truth that their obsessive focus on a Ukrainian volunteer is simply allowing the light of the Ukrainian nation's honesty to shine brightly. Next week, the teeth of the Russian devils will gnash ever harder, and their rabid mouths will foam in uncontrollable frenzy as the world will see a favorite Kremlin propagandist pay for their crimes. And this puppet of Putin is only the first. Russia's war criminal propagandists will all be hunted down, and justice will be served as we in Ukraine are led on this mission by faith in God, liberty, and complete liberation.
So they are promising the murder of what they call a Kremlin propagandist. And we're called Kremlin propagandists by our enemies, so it could just be anyone. Basically the murder of a journalist who doesn't report what they don't like, and promising that they will only be the first. And there have been many already. I mean, they're killing media figures inside Russia left and right, literary figures. Daria Dugina was deliberately targeted in a Ukrainian SBU operation and killed. So
in a car bombing, right? An obvious
this is an official spokesperson.
Attack.
This is an official
Vladimir
spokesperson.
Tatarsky. Yeah. Number of journalists have already been targeted, killed. Daria Dugina, and in bombings, right? Bombings in civilian areas, bombings in civilian buildings. There's no other word for it but terrorism. And this obviously comes as President Zelensky himself is threatening terrorism openly in an interview with The Economist. This is really kind of a terror wave, as you described it. The idea here being, and I think it's worth pulling up this tweet you made.
So this is Zelensky in an interview about 5 days ago with the Economist. Curtailing aid to Ukraine will only prolong the war, Mr. Zelensky argues, and it would create risks for the West in its own backyard. There's no way of predicting how the millions of Ukrainian refugees in European countries would react to their country being abandoned. That's the words of the Economist. Ukrainians have generally, quote, behaved well and are very grateful, Zelensky says, to those who sheltered them. They will not forget that generosity. But it would not be a, quote, good story for Europe if it were to, quote, drive these people into a corner. So what could Zelensky be implying? Around the same week that one of his top English language propagandists is threatening or promising the assassination of journalists, foreign journalists.
Well, let's break this down, right? Because what this means is we're going to take all those billions, hundreds of billions in weapons, right? Training, funding. And what we're going to do is openly threaten to use it against you if you don't give us more. This is the same thing that Al-Qaeda did, that the Mujahideen did. And then Osama bin Laden decided he'd been betrayed by the West, which didn't want to fund him anymore. He no longer became useful once Afghanistan succeeded, right? This Mujahideen in Afghanistan succeeded. They managed to use it to bring down the Soviet Union. He was no longer useful. The funding and the arms dried up. And who did he turn his sights on? Right? So it's the same exact thing. And I would say, that these people don't learn their lessons, but I think that's being too charitable. They know exactly what they're doing. This is all kind of part of the plan, right? And then we'll have justification for the next war on terror, right? And we can continue to have a reason to spend all of our money combating terror instead of building any infrastructure, doing anything for the masses of homeless people that now populate every major metropolitan center in the United States, providing any resources for people at home. All of that is going to be off the table for the foreseeable future once we have this terror wave that Zelensky is now threatening us with if we don't give him what he wants.
Yeah, and we've written before about Italian police breaking up Azov related plots by returning fighters to blow up police facilities and terrorize the country. We've written about American foreign fighters basically hiding, like Craig Lang, from murder charges in the US. These are hardcore white supremacists. But now Zelensky is referring to the entire mass of Ukrainian refugees in order to threaten and intimidate the West into continuing to provide him with advanced military systems, weapons systems. It also kind of reminds me of Erdogan exploiting Syrian refugees and unleashing them into Europe every time he fails to get what he wants in negotiations. Basically using masses of people as a negotiating tool really shows the cynicism of the government in Kiev. And well, the aid is going to decrease. Tony Blinken was in Kiev to basically tell Zelensky that the political headwinds in Washington and in the US are too intense to continue to provide aid at the same level. I think Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, was there for the same reason. And they're trying to edge him into some kind of negotiations. I don't see why Russia would enter into them now, given their success on the battlefield. That's the situation diplomatically that Blinken created by stifling a ceasefire and stifling negotiations throughout 2022. But now Zelensky's threatening a terror wave across Europe. And Europe, of course, is going to bear the brunt. What does Washington care? It's not going to happen here. How many Ukrainian refugees have we taken in here? How many Syrian refugees did we take in here? Europe always has to bear the brunt. Germany took in 1 million Syrian refugees. The US took in what, 60,000, 50,000? I mean, the US drives all of these insane proxy wars, and then it destabilizes Europe. And who benefits in Europe? I mean, this was the main thesis of my 2019 book, The Management of Savagery. The right wing. And then the US says, oh, democracy is under threat. Brexit. Well, it's your fault. And it's the fault specifically of the liberal interventionists, the Samantha Powers, the Hillary Clintons, the Joe Coxes in the UK, the Hillary Benns, the Keir Starmers. It's their fault. So back to Sarah Ashton-Cirillo, Wyatt. Formerly known as Michael Cirillo, a Democratic, very shady Democratic operative from Las Vegas, whose real story has yet to be fully told. There's a wild story there, how they wound up being a Democratic operative in Las Vegas, trapping Proud Boys through various unusual schemes into committing illicit acts that got them jailed or whatever, into becoming an official spokesperson for the Ukrainian military without even speaking Russian or Ukrainian. How that happened is an unusual story. I mean, I guess I don't know, to illustrate the weirdness of this saga. And sorry, but any normal person will see this as just extremely weird and not take seriously. Not take this person seriously, except as a repulsive reflection of the Ukrainian military's presentation to the world. This was Sarah Ashton-Cirillo as Michael Cirillo when they were a Democratic operative and liberal activist in Nevada just a few years ago, like not long ago.
Hours I'm going to be leaving to the United States. I've been here in Europe for 6 weeks, checked in on video several times. And this afternoon here in Frankfurt, I had the opportunity to visit the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is a tremendous international exhibition of publishers and authors, writers, and other ancillary parts of the writing industry. But the most important thing I found was this little postcard. And in German, it says, "Für das Wort und die Freiheit." And right below it, it reads, #free the words. And it's a movement against censorship. A censorship that is plaguing Europe and plaguing a lot of the nation states that are found across the globe. And so I'm hoping to put up this video, and if anybody sees it, remember, don't be afraid to speak your mind, and with words comes freedom. Thank you. Never forget.
Words comes freedom. How ironic. And so when Sarah Ashton-Cirillo was a man named Michael Cirillo, who seemed very comfortable about being a man, not very long ago, before they took on an entirely new identity, they were denouncing censorship. And now Sarah Ashton-Cirillo, the transgender spokesperson for the Ukrainian military, has put you on a new list, Wyatt, and is calling for you to be silenced. And they're calling for the killing of journalists with no denunciation from the U.S., nothing from the Committee to Protect Journalists or any international NGO in condemnation. What's going on there, Wyatt?
Well, it was not actually Sarah Ashton-Cirillo who created this list. This was originally published by Ukraine's ambassador for strategic communications, a man named Oleg Sherba. But real quick, before we get into that, I did want to add, in terms of what you were describing as kind of this this blowback of U.S. policy, and you mentioned that why would Russia want to negotiate? Because of course, at this point, they wouldn't, right? And they would see the fact that the United States is now willing to negotiate as basically a concession that things are not going the way the West wanted them to. Basically, the same way that the West imposed sanctions on Russia, they predicted that they would turn the ruble into rubble. That didn't happen. If anything, it allowed Russia to strengthen its domestic economic base. All of the companies that left McDonald's and Starbucks, they left these massive operations more or less intact, which then Russian business people were able to take over very quickly, have all the employees already trained on how to make everything, on how to run these businesses. They basically just handed the keys over to Russian entrepreneurs. The same thing is basically happening on the military front, right? We had Lloyd Austin predicting back in April of 2022, or rather explaining in April 2022 that, quote, "We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the things it has done in invading Ukraine," right? So that was the admission, very, very straightforwardly. Not that this has anything to do with democracy, which of course doesn't exist in Ukraine, which is now under martial law, which has no plans to hold elections. Zelensky has said that he won't even think about holding elections unless he gets $5 billion from the West. But the point was rather to weaken Russia. And what has happened instead? Well, now Russia is weakening NATO. Russia has effectively demilitarized Ukraine, destroyed all of its equipment, and is now destroying all of the NATO equipment that has been getting shipped in, all of the Challenger tanks, the Leopard tanks. Well, plenty of it, right? Enough that it has clearly impacted a number of Western countries' military readiness and their ability to fight. So to me, it's Looney Tunes level, Wile E. Coyote kind of tactics, where the Roadrunner just keeps blowing up Wile E. Coyote, who no matter what he wants to do, just can't seem to do anything right. But getting back to this Sarah Ashton-Cirillo story, I've now been placed on yet another list for the crime of witnessing elections, of traveling to territory that Ukraine claims as its own, despite widespread sentiment among the people who live there to the contrary. I witnessed elections as they were being held in Zaporozhia. And for this crime, I have been added to another list, this one produced by an organization called Democratic Integrity. I've been placed on a handful of other lists and another Ukrainian hit piece attacking me as well, basically calling me a vulture. This original tweet by Alexander Sherba, the ambassador for strategic communications at Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the former Ukrainian ambassador to Austria, says, the list of international observers, in scare quotes, who came to occupied Ukraine to enable the occupation and genocide. These aren't, quote unquote, useful idiots. These are vultures feeding on Ukraine's suffering. Another threat, this one a little bit more veiled. This follows threat by Anthony Blinken himself of sanctions and visa restrictions against anyone who served as an election observer for these elections, or anyone really who came to these territories at all. I myself was placed on Ukraine's notorious peacemaker kill list last year after I went to Crimea. Within 2 days of making it to Russia, I was placed on this list that has had dozens and dozens of people who have been placed on this list have been killed and then subsequently marked liquidated over their face in big red letters in Ukrainian. Another obvious threat against my physical safety for my reporting and my coverage and my failure to toe the line in terms of what the State Department's preferred regime in Kiev wants to have broadcast. And then within, a couple of weeks of that, my hotel in Donetsk was struck just 2 hours after I arrived with a 155 millimeter NATO standard artillery shell as I was returning from a restaurant. I was about 100 meters away. I don't have any proof that they were necessarily targeting me. It's entirely plausible they were simply targeting this hotel, the Donbass Palace, that's known to host journalists and international figures. Certainly no indication that I myself was personally targeted, but the fact of the matter is they are certainly targeting other people on this list. There are a number of people who've been killed, who've been placed on this list. Many of the people on this list are children. I believe her name is Faina. I'm blanking on her last name. We've interviewed her, 13-year-old. Sevenkova, yeah. So plenty of people here have real reason to worry for their personal physical integrity. And, at this point, it's just another list to add to the lists that they've listed me on.
Well, stay safe out there, Wyatt. I don't know, but I think the important thing is that to not be intimidated. We're not intimidated. We're not going to be intimidated by some freak show threatening to kill everybody. I think what we need to do again is hold the U.S. government accountable. This is because this is a U.S. government war. The U.S. government's paying for U.S. citizen Cirillo to be barking out these bizarre serial killer level threats against journalists. And so they need to be called out onto the mat for that, for sponsoring everything the Ukrainian government does. And every NGO needs to be called up and asked, and anyone who's watching this can do it. You can call and email Human Rights Watch, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Amnesty International, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and ask what they think about this US-backed US citizen in Kiev calling for the mass murder of journalists who basically don't say what the Ukrainian government wants. And the targeting of Wyatt Reed right here. None of them have said a word, not one word. So Wyatt, I know you have to go. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I will just say that this is a point I've made many times. No one in the Western media, aside from useful idiots, Katie Halper, Aaron Mate, no one in the U.S. media said a damn word about me getting added to this list, about my hotel being struck. I was told that I was going to be reached out to by someone at the Intercept. That, of course, never happened. It's not convenient to report this stuff. It just goes against the narrative. It makes it too clear that what we are pursuing in Ukraine has nothing to do with democracy or human rights or liberal values in the slightest. And I will just say, I added another link to this because this is another list that I've found myself added onto. This one called fakeobservers.org, which is run by the European Platform for Democratic Elections, entirely funded or almost entirely funded by the European Union and the German government. It's filled with inaccuracies, misinformation, lies about me. They even misspell my name at one point. They incorrectly claim that I work for Sputnik. I do not work for Sputnik anymore. And then they claim that I worked for the Grayzone when I covered the referendums last year. Also not true. But what it is another example of basically our money in the West being used to violate our own rights and prevent us from going out to tell the truth about what's happening in the world. The mainstream media, of course, could come and discuss what's happening. They could send reporters to the Donbass. There are no restrictions against them. They would be allowed in. That's what I've been told by officials in these new territories. It's just that they choose not to, despite having billion-dollar budgets, despite having more than enough resources to come to cover this. They choose instead to cover it up. And that's, again, why they are threatening people with sanctions, with visa restrictions. It's why they tried to freeze our GoFundMe. It's why they have permanently banned me from PayPal and from Venmo, because they want to prevent their people from knowing the truth. They want to prevent our people from knowing the truth. So they punish anybody who actually tries to tell the truth. So that's where we are now. It's a slippery slope. It's gotten increasingly dangerous in the past few years, and I'm worried that with the escalations, the decision now to send ATACMS missiles, which seems to be on the horizon, something that was dismissed, like the idea of sending F-16s, as a needless escalation that could potentially bring us to the cusp of World War III. Now all of that is on the table. The gloves are off. There's nothing that they won't do to win re-election and to win this, or continue, I should say, this proxy war with Russia. So everything is fair game, and it doesn't matter how many Ukrainians have to die. It doesn't matter how many of our rights, our basic fundamental rights, they have to violate. It seems at this point they're willing to do anything.